You know how some moments in your life feel like they happen in slow motion? Like you can see the disaster unfolding, but you're powerless to stop it. That's exactly what it felt like when I told my husband, Derek, that sometimes I think about my ex during sex. The words hung in the air between us like smoke, and I watched his face crumble in real time before he got up and walked out of our couples therapy session without saying another word. I'm Autumn Pope, I'm 34, and that moment in Dr. Henderson's beige office was the beginning of the end of my 8-year marriage. But to understand how we got there, I need to take you back to where it all started going wrong. Derek and I had been seeing Dr. Henderson for about 3 months when it happened. We weren't in crisis mode exactly, but we weren't thriving either. You know that feeling when you're roommates with someone you used to be crazy about? That was us. We'd gotten comfortable, maybe too comfortable, and somewhere along the way we'd stopped really seeing each other. The therapy was Derek's idea, which should have been my first clue that he was more invested in fixing us than I was. He'd noticed I'd been distant, distracted. I'd catch myself scrolling through my phone during dinner or finding excuses to stay late at the marketing agency where I worked. When he suggested counseling, I agreed because it seemed like the right thing to do, not because I was particularly motivated to change anything. Our sessions had been pretty surface level until that Thursday in November. Dr. Henderson, a soft-spoken woman in her 50s, who had a way of asking questions that made you squirm, decided to dig deeper into our intimacy issues. Autumn, she said, adjusting her glasses. You mentioned feeling disconnected during physical intimacy. Can you elaborate on what's going through your mind during those moments? I glanced at Derek, who was sitting on the opposite end of the couch, his hands folded in his lap like a schoolboy waiting for test results. We'd been together since I was 26, married for 5 years, and he still had this boyish quality that used to charm me but had started feeling more like naivety. I don't know, I said, which was only partially true. I guess I just zone out sometimes. What do you zone out to? Dr. Henderson pressed gently. And that's when I made the mistake that would change everything. Maybe it was her calm, non-judgmental tone. Or maybe I was just tired of keeping secrets. But I found myself saying, sometimes I think about my ex, Caleb. The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear Derek's heart breaking from 3 feet away. Dr. Henderson nodded as if I'd just told her I preferred tea over coffee, but when I looked at Derek, his face had gone completely white. It's not what you think, I started to say, but Derek was already standing up, grabbing his jacket from the back of his chair. I need some air, he said quietly. And before I could explain that it wasn't about wanting Caleb back, that it was just sometimes when things felt routine with Derek, I needed something to help things along, he was gone. Dr. Henderson and I sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment before she asked, "How are you feeling right now?" Like I just ruined my marriage, I admitted. Derek didn't come home that night. I called him 6 times and sent a dozen texts, but he didn't respond until the next morning with a simple message. Staying at my brother's, need time to think. I spent that night replaying the moment over and over, trying to figure out how I could have handled it differently. The truth was, I did think about Caleb sometimes during sex with Derek. Not because I wanted Caleb back. God knows that relationship had been a disaster, but because those memories still carried a charge that my marriage had somehow lost. Caleb and I had dated for almost 3 years, in my late 20s. He was a bartender with aspirations of becoming a chef, the kind of guy who could make you feel like the only person in the room when he focused his attention on you. He was also unreliable, emotionally unavailable, and had a tendency to disappear for days at a time without explanation. Our relationship had been intense but toxic, full of passionate reunions and devastating breakups. Derek, on the other hand, was steady, reliable. He worked as a project manager for a construction company, never forgot anniversaries, and always put the toilet seat down. When we met at a friend's housewarming party, I was still reeling from my final breakup with Caleb. Derek was everything Caleb wasn't, consistent, emotionally available, ready for commitment. I thought that was what I wanted, security, stability, someone who wouldn't leave me wondering where I stood. And for the first few years, it was enough. Derek adored me in a way Caleb never had. He was proud to introduce me to his family, talked about our future with certainty, and made me feel safe. But somewhere along the way, safe had started feeling like settling. The next evening, Derek finally called. His voice was flat, drained of the warmth I was used to. "I keep replaying what you said," he started without preamble. "And I can't figure out if you were trying to hurt me or if you were just being honest." "Derek, please come home so we can talk about this properly," I said. "You didn't let me finish explaining." "What's to explain, Autumn?" "You think about another man when we're together, when we're supposed to be closest. How am I supposed to come back from that?" I could hear the pain in his voice, and it made my chest ache. "It's not like that. It's not about wanting him back. Caleb was terrible for me, you know that. It's just, sometimes when things feel routine between us, I need something to what? To get through it? To get through being with me?" The hurt in his voice was unbearable. "No, that's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" I struggled to find the right words. How do you explain to someone that sometimes you need to mentally transport yourself somewhere else during your most intimate moments together? How do you tell the person who loves you most that their love sometimes feels suffocating rather than freeing? "I don't know," I said finally, which was the most honest answer I could give. Derek came home 3 days later, but something fundamental had shifted between us. He was polite but distant, like a house guest who was being careful not to overstep. We moved around each other in our small apartment with the kind of formal courtesy you'd show a stranger. Our next therapy session was tense. Derek sat even further away from me on the couch, and when Dr. Henderson asked how we were processing our last conversation, he was the first to speak. "I've been thinking about what Autumn said," he began, his voice carefully controlled. "And I realize I need to understand something. Is this a recent development, or has this been going on our entire relationship?" I felt my face flush. "It's not like I planned it or anything. Sometimes my mind just wanders." "That's not what I asked," Derek said, looking directly at me for the first time since that awful session. "How long? I don't know. A couple of years, maybe?" Derek absorbed this information with a nod that looked more like a flinch. "So for years, while I thought we were making love, you were thinking about someone else." "It wasn't every time," I said defensively. "And it wasn't because I wanted to be with him instead of you." "Then why?" Dr. Henderson interjected gently. I took a shaky breath. "Because with Caleb, everything was intense, unpredictable. Even when things were bad between us, the physical connection was electric. With Derek, it's comfortable and sweet. But sometimes I miss that feeling of being completely consumed by someone." The silence that followed was crushing. Derek's face had gone through several emotions, hurt, anger, resignation, before settling on something that looked like understanding, which somehow made it worse. "So I'm boring," he said quietly. "No, you're not boring. You're safe," he finished for me, "reliable. The guy you settled for when you couldn't have the one you really wanted." "That's not true," I protested. But even as I said it, I wondered if it was. That night, Derek asked me about Caleb directly for the first time since we'd been together. We were sitting at our kitchen table, picking at the Thai food he'd brought home for dinner, when he said, "Tell me about him." "Derek, I don't think that's a good idea." "I need to understand what I'm competing with," he said, what made him so electric. So I told him. About Caleb's unpredictability, the way he could make me feel like I was the center of the universe one day and completely invisible the next. About the fights that would end with us throwing things at each other, then having sex against the kitchen counter. About how I never knew if he was going to show up when he said he would, or disappear for a weekend without explanation. "He sounds awful," Derek said when I finished. "He was," I agreed. "But he was also exciting," Derek finished. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "I know this isn't fair to you." Derek was quiet for a long time, pushing pad thai around his plate. Finally, he looked up at me. "Do you think we can fix this?" "I want to try," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. Over the next few weeks, Derek threw himself into trying to be more exciting. He suggested spontaneous date nights, initiated sex at unexpected times, even bought some books about spicing up long-term relationships. It was sweet and heartbreaking at the same time, watching this fundamentally gentle man try to transform himself into someone he wasn't. The problem was, it felt forced. When Derek tried to be spontaneous, it came across as calculated. When he attempted to be more assertive in bed, it seemed like he was performing a role rather than expressing genuine desire. And I found myself comparing everything he did to my memories of Caleb, which wasn't fair to either of us. During this period, I made a mistake that would prove to be far more damaging than my original confession. I looked up Caleb on social media. I told myself I was just curious, that I wanted to see what he was up to these days. But when I found his Instagram profile and saw photos of him at various restaurants around the city where we still both lived, something stirred in me that I thought was long buried. He looked good. Older, more mature, but still with that slightly dangerous edge that had always attracted me. His bio said he was now a sous chef at a trendy downtown restaurant. It appeared he'd finally gotten his act together professionally, which made me wonder if he'd changed in other ways too. Before I could stop myself, I was scrolling through months of his posts, looking for clues about his personal life. There were photos with various women, but nothing that suggested a serious relationship. Part of me was relieved, though I tried not to examine why. It started innocently enough. I sent Caleb a simple message on Instagram. Saw you finally made it in the kitchen. Congratulations on the new job. He responded within hours. Autumn Pope. Now there's a name from the past. Thanks. How's life treating you? Can't complain, I wrote back. Married life keeping me busy. Married, huh? Should have figured. You always were the type to find someone stable. Something about the way he said stable stung. Like it was a criticism rather than a compliment. Before I knew it, we were exchanging messages daily. Nothing inappropriate at first. Just catching up, reminiscing about mutual friends, sharing updates about our careers. But gradually, our conversations became more personal. Caleb started referencing specific memories we shared, inside jokes from our relationship. He asked about my marriage in a way that suggested he could sense it wasn't perfect. Still happy, he asked one day, and I found myself typing back, happiness is complicated, before I could think better of it. Tell me about it, he replied, followed by, we should get coffee sometime. I'd love to see you. I stared at that message for 20 minutes before responding, I'm not sure that's a good idea. Just coffee, he wrote back. Two old friends catching up. What's the harm? I told myself it was innocent when I agreed to meet Caleb for coffee while Derek was at work. I even convinced myself that it might help me understand why I was still so fixated on my past with him. That seeing him in person would remind me of all the reasons we hadn't worked out. I chose a coffee shop across town, somewhere I was unlikely to run into anyone I knew. When Caleb walked in, my heart started racing in a way it hadn't in years. He looked even better in person than in his photos, and when he smiled at me, that same slightly crooked grin that used to make me forget my own name, I felt like I was 28 again. You look amazing, he said, sliding into the seat across from me. Marriage clearly agrees with you. You look good too, I admitted. Success suits you. We talked for 2 hours. About his career, my job, the changes in our old neighborhood. He was charming and funny, but also more grounded than I remembered. He apologized for how he'd treated me during our relationship, acknowledged that he'd been selfish and immature. I've done a lot of growing up, he said. Had to, really. Life has a way of forcing you to face your shit. When he asked about my marriage, I found myself being more honest than I should have been. I told him about the therapy, about feeling stuck, about missing the intensity we'd once shared. Sounds like you need some excitement in your life, he said. And the way he looked at me when he said it made my stomach flip. When we parted ways, he hugged me goodbye, and for just a moment, I let myself remember what it felt like to be held by someone who made my pulse race. We should do this again, he said. And despite every rational thought in my head, I heard myself saying, I'd like that. Over the next month, I met Caleb for coffee 3 more times. Our conversations became increasingly intimate, and the space between us seemed to shrink with each meeting. He would touch my hand when he made a point, let his gaze linger on my face in a way that made me feel beautiful and desired in a way I hadn't in years. At home, Derek was still trying to inject excitement into our relationship, but his efforts only highlighted what was missing. When he surprised me with dinner reservations at an expensive restaurant, I couldn't help comparing it to the hole-in-the-wall places Caleb used to take me to, where we'd stay up until 3 in the morning talking about everything and nothing. When Derek bought me lingerie, I thought about how Caleb used to prefer me in his old t-shirts. When Derek planned a weekend getaway, I remembered the spontaneous road trips Caleb and I would take on a whim. I was living in 2 worlds, and the contrast was becoming unbearable. Our therapy sessions continued, but I found myself being increasingly dishonest about my state of mind. When Dr. Henderson asked how I was feeling about our relationship, I gave the answers I thought she and Derek wanted to hear rather than expressing my true feelings. I think we're making progress, I would say, while privately counting the hours until I could see Caleb again. Everything came to a head on a Thursday evening in February. I had been out with Caleb that afternoon, and our conversation had taken a decidedly flirtatious turn. When I got home, Derek was waiting for me with a strange expression on his face. "How was your day?" he asked, but something in his tone made me wary. "Fine," I said carefully. "Just ran some errands after work." Derek nodded slowly. "What kind of errands?" "Just things. Groceries, the pharmacy." "Why?" He held up his phone, and I saw my own Instagram profile on the screen. More specifically, he saw a photo I'd posted from the coffee shop, where I'd been with Caleb that afternoon. In the background of my selfie, Caleb was clearly visible, though I hadn't noticed when I posted it. My stomach dropped. "Derek, I can explain." "Explain what?" he asked quietly. "That you've been meeting with your ex? The one you think about during sex with me?" "It's not what you think," I said, the words sounding hollow even to me. "Then what is it?" Derek stood up, and I could see he was shaking. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been having an emotional affair with the man you fantasize about while you're with me." "We're just friends," I protested weakly. "Friends," Derek repeated. "Is that what you tell yourself? That this is innocent?" I couldn't meet his eyes. "Nothing physical has happened between us." "But you want it to," Derek said, and it wasn't really a question. The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of everything I couldn't bring myself to say. "I think I need to stay somewhere else for a while," Derek said finally. "I need space to figure out if there's anything left of us worth fighting for." After Derek left, I called Caleb. I needed to talk to someone who understood the intensity of what I was feeling, the confusion and guilt and longing that was tearing me apart. He found out about our coffee dates, I told him when he answered. "How's he taking it?" Caleb asked, and I could hear the concern in his voice. "He moved out," I said, and started crying. "Hey, it's okay," Caleb said softly. "Maybe this is the universe telling you something." "Like what?" "Like maybe you're not as happy in your marriage as you thought you were. Like maybe we found each other again for a reason." That night, Caleb came over. We sat on my couch, drinking wine and talking about our relationship, about the mistakes we'd both made, about how we'd both grown and changed. "I never stopped thinking about you," he admitted. "Even when I was with other people, there was always this part of me that wondered what would have happened if we'd met each other later in life, when we were both more ready for something real." When he kissed me, it felt like coming home and jumping off a cliff at the same time. All the passion I'd been missing, all the intensity I'd been craving, came flooding back, but underneath the desire was something else. Guilt, fear, and the growing realization that I was about to cross a line I could never uncross. "I can't," I said, pulling away. "I'm still married." "Barely," Caleb said, but he didn't push. Instead, he held me while I cried. And for the first time in months, I felt like someone truly understood me. Derek came back the next week to get more of his things. He looked tired, older somehow, and seeing him like that made my chest ache. I've been thinking about everything, he said as he packed clothes into a suitcase. About us, about what went wrong. I sat on the bed we'd shared for 5 years, watching him fold shirts with the same methodical care he applied to everything in his life. I realize I can't compete with a fantasy, he continued. And that's what he is to you, isn't it? This idealized version of passion and excitement that real life can't measure up to. Derek, that's not... It is, though, he interrupted gently. You fell in love with the idea of intensity, of drama, of never knowing what comes next. And I'm never going to be that person. I'm never going to be the guy who sweeps you off your feet with grand gestures and emotional chaos. He was right, and we both knew it. The thing is, Derek said, closing his suitcase, I thought that was a good thing. I thought stability and consistency and reliability were valuable. I thought they were enough. They are enough, I said, but the words felt empty. Derek looked at me with such sadness that I had to look away. Not for you, he said simply. And that's okay. It hurts like hell, but it's okay. We both deserve to be with someone who loves all of who we are, not just the parts that feel safe or familiar. I do love you, I said, and meant it. I know, Derek replied, but you're not in love with me. Maybe you never were. Maybe I was just the right person at the time when you needed something different from what you'd had with him. After Derek left, I sat alone in our quiet apartment and tried to imagine my future. I thought about Caleb, about the possibility of rekindling what we'd once had. The passion was still there, the chemistry undeniable. But was that enough to build a life on? I thought about our history, the fights, the uncertainty, the way he used to disappear when things got difficult. Had he really changed as much as he claimed? Or was I just romanticizing our past because it felt more exciting than my present? I thought about Derek, about his kindness and consistency, about the way he'd never once made me doubt his love or commitment, about how he'd tried so hard to be something he wasn't because he thought that's what I needed. And I thought about myself, about why I'd been so drawn to chaos, why stability had felt like suffocation, why I'd been willing to throw away something good for the possibility of something that had never really worked in the first place. That night, I called Dr. Henderson and scheduled an individual session. I think I've been confusing excitement with love, I told Dr. Henderson during our session. And stability with settling. She nodded encouragingly. Can you elaborate on that? With Caleb, everything was dramatic and intense, and I told myself that meant we had this deep connection. But looking back, a lot of that intensity came from uncertainty, from never knowing if he was going to be there or not. The highs were incredible, but that was partly because the lows were so devastating. And with Derek? With Derek, I always knew where I stood. He loved me completely, consistently, but instead of appreciating that security, I started to take it for granted. I started to equate his steadiness with being boring. Dr. Henderson leaned forward. What do you think changed? What made you start seeing Derek's consistency as a negative rather than a positive? I thought about it for a long time. I think I got scared, I said finally. Derek loved me so completely, so openly, that it made me feel exposed. With Caleb, I was always performing, always trying to be worthy of his attention. With Derek, I didn't have to perform, and that felt vulnerable in a different way. So you created drama to feel more comfortable. Maybe, I admitted. Or maybe I just never learned how to be loved properly. Caleb's love was conditional. I had to earn it every day. Derek's love was just there, constant, and I didn't know how to handle that. 2 weeks later, Derek filed for divorce. It was amicable, as these things go. We met at a coffee shop to discuss dividing our belongings, and he was as gentle and considerate as ever. I want you to be happy, he said as we finished going through our list. I mean that. I want that for you too, I replied, and meant it completely. I hope you figure out what you're looking for, Derek said. But I also hope you realize that maybe what you're looking for isn't out there. Maybe it's something you have to create for yourself. After he left, I sat in that coffee shop for another hour, thinking about his words. He was right, of course. I'd been looking for someone else to provide me with excitement, intensity, passion, instead of figuring out how to cultivate those things within myself and my relationships. I stopped seeing Caleb after that. When he called to ask why I was pulling away, I tried to explain what I'd realized about myself, about my patterns, about what I actually needed. "So you're choosing the boring guy after all," he said. And I could hear the hurt and confusion in his voice. "I'm not choosing anyone right now," I said. "I'm choosing myself." Caleb and I exchange occasional pleasantries when we run into each other around town. But the spark that had drawn us back together has faded. Not because the attraction isn't still there, but because I finally understand that attraction alone isn't enough to build a life on. I'm 35 now, still single, still figuring things out. I've been in therapy for over a year, working on understanding my patterns, my fears, my tendency to idealize what I don't have while undervaluing what I do. I think about Derek sometimes, about the life we might have had if I'd been emotionally mature enough to appreciate what we had instead of mourning what we didn't. I think about the kindness in his eyes, the way he used to bring me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings, the way he never once made me feel like I wasn't enough. I realize now that the problem was never that Derek was boring or that our relationship lacked passion. The problem was that I didn't know how to be present in my own life, how to find excitement and meaning in everyday moments, rather than constantly seeking them in drama and chaos. I'm learning slowly how to be alone without being lonely, how to appreciate stability without feeling trapped by it, how to love someone without needing them to complete me or provide me with constant validation. Maybe someday I'll find someone who combines Derek's steadiness with the kind of spark I thought I needed. Or maybe I'll realize that spark isn't something someone else gives you, it's something you bring to a relationship yourself. Either way, I'm finally starting to understand that the most important relationship I need to work on is the one I have with myself. Everything else is just details. The morning Derek walked out of Dr. Henderson's office, I thought my world was ending. Now I realize it was just beginning. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be exactly what you needed, even if it takes you a while to see it that way. I lost a good man because I didn't know how to love him properly. But in losing him, I found something I'd been missing my entire life: the possibility of learning how to love myself.